Japanese Prime Minister Fumio Kishida's decision to hold a state funeral for former leader Shinzo Abe has led to opposition and protests. Abe, Japan's longest-serving prime minister, was assassinated in July and will be given a rare state funeral next week. Critics say the decision has no legal basis and was taken by Kishida for political reasons. Protests against the state funeral further intensified after Abe and the ruling party's links to a controversial South Korea-based church became known. Here's more on what's become a growing political headache for the Kishida government.
This is where a Japanese man set himself on fire in Tokyo last week. He told police he tried to kill himself in protest against the planned state funeral for former Prime Minister Shinzo Abe. Abe's funeral has become a flashpoint for public anger over political scandal and opposition to Abe's successor from the same party, current Prime Minister Fumio Kishida.
I think Abe was a terrible politician. And Prime Minister Kishida said he would listen to the opinions of Japanese people. But he is ignoring opinion polls that show more than half of the public is against the state funeral.
Abe's assassination in July triggered a series of revelations about the current ruling Liberal Democratic Party's links to the Unification Church, a religious movement regarded by some as a cult whose members are often known as Moonies.
I was so shocked to find out how deeply the Unification Church has been involved in Japanese politics. This is very dangerous. I think we should not allow this to be happening.
When Abe resigned 2 years ago, he was deeply unpopular after a series of scandals. But it was his close association with the church that was the alleged motive for his murder. His killer says his own mother had been defrauded by the Unification Church, leaving their family destitute. Abe's killing threw a spotlight on the church's deep connection to Japan's ruling party, the LDP. Prime Minister Kishida apologised and promised to sever his party's links to the church. But the fallout for the LDP, his government and him personally, has been hugely damaging.
Now let's get more on this from Jeff Kingston. He's a professor of history at Temple University in Tokyo and joins me now from there. Professor Kingston, how widespread is the anger over this state funeral? I mean, one person appears to have set himself on fire over it.
So I think it is emblematic of widespread anger about the decision by Prime Minister Kishida to hold a state funeral for former Prime Minister Abe. And clearly, people are not persuaded by the reasons Kishida has given. And right now, about twice as many Japanese are opposed to the state funeral than are for it. So this 2-to-1 ratio in opposition has translated into a plunge in Kishida's support ratings. So I think, he never, ever anticipated such a strong backlash, in the week after Abe's brutal assassination. And there had been a lot of positive, fawning media coverage. The public, more or less 2-to-1 were in favor. So that has flip-flopped since then.
Just about Prime Minister Fumio Kishida, all this opposition is growing to the state funeral. Why does he continue to stand by the decision to have one?
Well, it's already been decided. So it would be a real loss of face to stand down and say, I really miscalculated this. I thought this was going to be politically beneficial to me. I was going to curry favor with the hardliners in the LDP aligned with Abe. And this would sort of be an opportunity for the LDP to bask in the reflected glory of the longest serving prime minister ever in Japan, Shinzo Abe. But what this underscores is that when Abe resigned 2 years ago, he was deeply unpopular. and there was a cascade of scandals. And this led to an erosion of trust in him. And so his political legacy is definitely questioned among the Japanese.
So you are essentially saying that there is a situation in which Prime Minister Fumio Kishida could actually damage his own party by sticking to this decision.
Well, I mean, they've invited all the dignitaries. There's no, turning back. Once he announced the decision, that was it, and there was no reset button. But the problem is he didn't anticipate the media revelations about the extensive and deep ties of the Moonies with the ruling LDP. So there's been a constant drumbeat of revelations about how close and systematic those ties are. And this has certainly reflected badly on Kishida and the LDP. So he tried to hit the reset button by reshuffling his cabinet. But it turns out that most of the people he brought in also were implicated.
I did want to sort of come back to the Unification Church because it keeps coming up in all explanations, and you've also mentioned it a number of times. What is it about the Unification Church and its ties with the LDP? What is the political influence it wields, and why is it so unpopular?
Well, Abe's grandfather was the one that sort of facilitated the entry of the Unification Church into Japan back in the late 60s. He was close to the Reverend Moon. And so, these family dynastic ties have reflected badly on Abe. And when people think of the Moonies, they think of coerced donations from members and mass weddings. And so in general, in Japan, the Moonies do not have a very positive image. And it came as a huge surprise that an organization that many people regard as a cult has such strong ties in the corridors of power. And so people are wondering, what's going on? How could this be? So I think that there's already distrust of Abe, and now his legacy is toxic because of the dynastic ties with the Moonies and public perceptions that the Moonies are like a cult. And there have been more than 30,000 official complaints by former members of the Unification Church that they've been defrauded for a total of something like $800 million. So people are paying attention, and really, this has really hit Kishida badly.
We'll have to leave it there, but thanks so much for that detailed analysis, Professor Jeff Kingston from Temple University in Tokyo.